Some say death is an ending. In ancient Egypt, death was only a doorway, and beyond that doorway something waits. For judgment, for payment, for souls. Dust drifted through the air like falling ash. Karim stood frozen, staring at the stone altar where Tarek's broken body lay. His blood was still warm, still flowing, still soaking into the ancient carvings beneath him. The bronze blade had done its work. The Jackal Priest had claimed its first sacrifice. But it wasn't finished. A heavy silence wrapped itself around the chamber. Nour's soft sobs echoed through the stone. Hassan fell to his knees, clutching his head, muttering prayers under his breath. Mona stood in shock, her eyes locked on Tarek's lifeless form. She didn't blink, she didn't speak, she didn't move. Karim stepped back, his breath shaking. "Why?" he whispered. "Why did he do that?" No answer came except the low growl of shifting stone. The torches flickered, the ground trembled. Somewhere deep within the tomb, a massive stone door slid open, revealing a dark, gaping passage. The Jackal Priest turned its head not toward them, but toward the new darkness that had revealed itself. Something had been awakened, something ancient, something hungry. Mona finally spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "Tarek, he knew this would happen." Karim snapped toward her. "What are you talking about?" She didn't look away from Tarek's body. He knew about this place. He knew the stories. He knew the price. Hassan looked at her in disbelief, his face pale. "So he brought us here to die?" "No," Mona said quietly. "He brought us here to finish something." Karim grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "Finish what?" Before she could answer, the Jackal Priest turned. It faced them again. Judgment wasn't over. It raised a blood-soaked hand and pointed to the open passage. Without a word, it commanded them to continue. The ritual had only begun. They didn't want to move, but something inside that temple of death forced them. A cold pressure pressed at their backs, like invisible hands urging them forward. One step, then another. Karim held the camera low, his shaky breath caught by the microphone. Nour walked close to him, clutching his arm so tightly he could feel her nails. Hassan dragged his feet, his eyes wide and vacant, his lips moving silently in prayer. Mona walked as if she already knew where the passage would lead. Behind them, the Jackal Priest followed, silent, patient, eternal. The narrow tunnel walls began to close in, carved with hieroglyphs so old they were nearly erased by time. Karim lifted the camera, the beam of his light dancing across the ancient etchings. He captured the carvings as they passed human figures kneeling before a tall, jackal-headed priest. The images depicted sacrifice, mummification, and then resurrection. "Karim," Mona said quietly, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "Shine the light higher." He did. At the top of the wall, a single inscription remained untouched by time, perfectly preserved. Mona read it slowly, dread forming in her voice. "Only the heart free of sin may cross the gate of final dawn." Nour shivered beside him. "What does that mean?" "It's a judgment chamber," Mona replied, her voice tight with fear. "This place isn't a tomb. It's a trial." Hassan stopped dead in his tracks. No. This is pharaoh magic. Old magic. Forbidden's magic." Karim turned on him, his own fear turning to frustration. "What are you talking about, Hassan?" Hassan backed away, his words shaking. "My grandfather? He told me stories of priests who guarded the path between life and death. They were chosen, trained in rituals older than Egypt itself. They served Anubis, the guardian of the scales. And what does that have to do with us? Nour asked, her voice a small whisper. Hassan stared at her, his eyes haunted and wide with terror. It means we aren't trapped by a monster. We're standing in a place meant to judge souls. A heavy, guttural breath echoed from behind them. They all turned. The Jackal Priest was watching, listening, judging. They moved again, faster now, a desperate scramble, until the passage opened into a vast, cavernous hall. Stone pillars rose into an impenetrable darkness above. At the center of the chamber stood a massive obsidian door, sealed shut, and carved with hundreds of names, scratched violently, as though the stone itself had resisted them. Nour stepped closer, her eyes tracing the frantic markings. What is this? Mona swallowed hard. It's the Gate of Hearts. She reached out and touched the cold stone, her fingers tracing one of the names. It's where the ancient Egyptians believed the truth of a soul was revealed before it could enter the afterlife. Karim frowned, the camera heavy in his hand. How? A voice spoke from the shadows behind them. By weighing it. They whirled around. But the voice hadn't come from the Jackal Priest. It came from a man standing in the shadows near a pillar. A man they had seen before. A man who shouldn't be alive. Tarek, or something that looked like him. His skin was pale, almost translucent under the dim light. His eyes were hollow, empty voids. Blood still stained the front of his shirt. Yet he stood there alive watching them. Nour screamed, a raw, piercing sound that bounced off the ancient stone. Hassan stumbled back, tripping over his own feet. Karim froze, his breath stopping in his throat, the camera nearly slipping from his grasp. Mona didn't even look surprised. Tarek stepped forward, his movements stiff and unnatural. You were never supposed to follow me, he said. His voice sounded distant, wrong like an echo coming from somewhere deep beneath the earth. Karim finally found his voice, a choked whisper. You're dead. Tarek gave a faint, broken smile that didn't reach his empty eyes. We don't die here. Karim raised the camera slowly, as if the lens could somehow shield him from the impossible sight. Tarek, the same Tarek who had died screaming in the sand just hours ago, was standing right in front of them, alive or something horrifyingly close to it. Nour stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat as she shook her head. No, this isn't real. You're dead. We saw it happen. Tarek's gaze met hers, and his eyes were filled with an unmistakable, genuine pain. I know, he said, his voice a quiet rasp. I remember dying. Mona stepped forward, her expression a stark contrast to the others. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't even afraid. Then explain, she demanded, her voice firm. Tell them what you told me. Karim spun around, his camera swiveling to Mona. What do you mean, you knew? Mona's jaw tightened, but she held his gaze, a mixture of shame and stubbornness on her face. Tarek contacted me yesterday before all of this started. He said he found something dangerous. Hassan's eyes darted between them, his voice laced with disbelief and betrayal. So you knew something was wrong, and you still brought us here? Mona finally looked away, unable to face their accusations. I thought we could control it. Tarek let out a hollow, bitter laugh. No one controls this place. He moved toward the massive black stone gate, dragging his hand along its surface as if the touch seared his skin. From the deep shadows behind them, the Jackal Priest watched in absolute silence. "This temple," Tarek said, his voice echoing in the chamber, "it isn't a tomb, it's a seal, a prison, and I'm the one who broke it." Karim lowered his camera, the weight of it suddenly feeling immense. "Why?" Tarek looked at him, and his face contorted with a guilt so profound it was painful to watch. "Because I was looking for her." The chamber fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Nour blinked away her confusion. "Her? Who are you talking about?" Tarek's voice trembled, cracking with grief. "My sister, Sarah." Karim froze, the name hitting him like a physical blow. Hassan went white as a sheet. Mona just closed her eyes as if in prayer or resignation. "She disappeared a year ago," Tarek continued, his voice barely a whisper. "Vanished without a trace. The only clue I ever found was a name, scratched into her journal over and over again." He turned to a wall covered in hieroglyphs and brushed away centuries of dust, revealing a symbol burned deep into the ancient stone. The mark of the Jackal Priest. "She found this place before we did. She vanished because of it. I came here to find her, but when I opened the burial chamber, I awakened him." He glanced toward the silent, watching figure of the Jackal Priest. "Now I can't leave. None of us can." Nour wiped tears from her eyes, her voice shaking. "So how do we get out?" Tarek didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the ominous Gate of Hearts and pressed his palm flat against it. "The only way out is through judgment." A deep, ancient sound vibrated through the chamber, like a heartbeat made of solid stone. The obsidian gate began to crack open, spilling a cold, silver fog that crawled across the floor. "But once it opens," Tarek warned, his voice hollow and final, "there is no going back." The Gate of Hearts groaned as it opened, the sound of stone screaming against stone, echoing through the tomb. A frigid gust of air rushed out, crawling over their skin like an invisible predator, freezing the very breath in their lungs. Beyond the gate lay a long corridor carved from pure obsidian. It was lined with statues of Anubis, the jackal god of the afterlife, each one holding a set of scales in one hand and a wickedly sharp blade in the other. As the group stepped inside, their footsteps made an unnaturally muffled sound, as if the walls themselves were swallowing the noise. Hassan's voice was a strained whisper. "Where the hell are we?" "The Hall of Judgment," Tarek answered, his voice low and grave. "The Path of Souls." Karim scanned the hallway, his unease growing with every step. "Judgment by who?" Tarek didn't have to answer. At the far end of the corridor, a massive black throne carved from what looked like bones came into view, and seated upon it was the Jackal Priest. No longer a distant shadow, no longer silent. He was waiting for them like a king who had known all along they would arrive. "Move," Tarek urged. "We don't have much time." They advanced slowly, the air thick with a fear so palpable you could taste it. Karim raised his camera, his hands trembling. "Nobody is ever going to believe this." The Jackal Priest lifted one hand, a simple, almost lazy gesture. Instantly, the camera died. The light went out, the screen went black, dead. "Technology won't follow you to the afterlife," Tarek muttered darkly. Nour swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" Tarek pointed toward a set of golden scales that floated ominously in the air before the throne. "We are judged, one by one." "What does that mean?" Hassan asked, his voice cracking. Just then, a gruesome tearing sound echoed from deeper in the hall, followed by the coppery, sickening smell of blood flooding the air. "It means," Tarek said, his voice heavy with dread, "that something is coming." A stone slab in the wall to their right began to grind open, revealing a dark doorway covered in hieroglyphs. Hassan froze, his eyes wide with terror. Why is it opening?" "Because it's for you," Tarek said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Hassan backed away, shaking his head violently. No, I'm not going in there." Tarek grabbed him by the shoulders, his grip like iron. "Listen to me. If you run, you die here. If you face it, you might live." Hassan's gaze pleaded with the others, his eyes wet with tears. "What if I don't want to know what's inside?" Karim stepped forward, his own fear pushed aside. "We'll wait for you," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "We're with you." Hassan took a shuddering breath, nodded once, and walked through the doorway. The stone door slammed shut behind him with a deafening finality. Inside, Hassan found himself in a small, torch-lit chamber. In the center of the room was a stone table, stained dark with old blood, and on it lay his mother. Her eyes were open, but lifeless. Her chest was cut open, her heart missing. Hassan staggered forward, choking on a sob. "No, this isn't real." "It can't be real," a voice whispered from the shadows behind him. "You left her alone." He spun around. Nobody was there. The voice echoed again, this time from all around him. "She begged for your help." He clutched his head, trying to block it out. "Stop it." A tall, hooded figure stepped from the darkness, holding a still-beating heart in its hand. "Confess," the figure commanded. Hassan stumbled backward. "I didn't do anything." "Exactly," the voice hissed, filled with venom. "You did nothing." While she died, the heart in the figure's hand stopped beating. Its eyes, cold and yellow, pierced through Hassan's soul. "Offer your heart or carry your guilt forever." A blade extended from its other hand. Outside, the others waited in agonizing silence. A single blood-curdling scream tore through the thick stone walls. Then, nothing. The stone door rumbled open. Hassan stepped out. He was pale, shaking uncontrollably, but he was alive. His shirt was torn, and a fresh line of blood seeped from a cut on his chest, but he was breathing. Nour rushed to him. "Hassan, are you okay?" He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. He just stared into the empty space ahead, his voice a dead, hollow monotone. "One of us won't leave here alive." Karim's heart pounded against his ribs, the echo of Hassan's words ringing in the suffocating silence of the tomb. He stared at his friend, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean, one of us won't leave alive?" Hassan didn't reply. He didn't even look up. He simply drifted to the side of the grand hall, slumping against the cold stone wall. He clutched his chest, his knuckles white, as if trying to hold together something that had already shattered within him. A profound, unspoken grief seemed to radiate from him, a silent warning that chilled Karim to the bone. Before anyone could break the heavy tension, a low grinding sound filled the chamber. Another section of the wall receded, revealing a new stone doorway, identical to the one Hassan had just emerged from. But this one was different. It didn't wait for a volunteer. With a groan of ancient mechanisms, the stone door slid open on its own. From the darkness beyond, a soft, familiar sound drifted out, a sound that could break any heart. A child crying. Nour froze instantly. Every drop of blood seemed to drain from her face, leaving it a mask of pale shock. Her lips parted, but only a choked whisper escaped. No, 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 not me. Karim, driven by a protective instinct, took a step towards the dark opening, but Tarek's hand shot out, firm on his arm, stopping him. This path is hers, Tarek said, his voice low and solemn, leaving no room for argument. Nour backed away from the doorway, her head shaking in frantic denial. Her voice was thin, brittle with terror. I'm not going in there. You have no choice, Tarek said, his words quiet but unyielding, like the stone that surrounded them. Tears welled in Nour's eyes, but they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. Her entire posture shifted, her fear replaced by a fiery defiance. Screw this place, she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. And screw your judgment nonsense. I didn't do anything wrong. At her outburst, the silent figure on the throne stirred. The Jackal Priest, a statue of death and judgment, slowly, deliberately, turned its canine skull to face her. In perfect sync, the torches lining the hall flared violently, their flames roaring upwards, casting long, dancing shadows that writhed like living things. The message was terrifyingly clear. Enter the doorway, or be taken by the force that commanded this hall. Nour stared back at the skull-faced god, her jaw tightening. She wiped the angry tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand, her expression hardening into a mask of resolve. Fine, she said, her voice steady and sharp as a blade. Let's see what the past thinks it knows about me. With a final, defiant glare at the Jackal Priest, she straightened her shoulders and strode purposefully into the waiting darkness. The moment she crossed the threshold, the stone door slammed shut with a deafening boom, sealing her inside, alone. The room she entered was colder than the tomb outside, a chilling, unnatural cold that seemed to seep into her very bones. In the center of the small stone chamber, a single flickering light bulb hung precariously over a small, simple bed. And sitting on that bed was a little boy. His face was buried in his hands, his small shoulders shaking with gut-wrenching sobs. Nour's breath hitched. A wave of ice and fire washed over her. No, she whispered, the word a fragile plea to the universe. It couldn't be. The boy slowly lifted his face, his features illuminated by the weak, flickering light. And Nour's world tilted on its axis. She knew that face. She knew those eyes. Yusef, she breathed, her voice cracking with disbelief. How is this possible? It was her younger brother, her little brother who had been gone for years, lost to a world that had torn them apart. He looked at her, and his expression wasn't one of anger or even fear. It was something far worse. It was a look of pure, soul-deep betrayal. You said you'd come back for me. His voice was a strange, haunting echo, a disturbing fusion of a child's innocent tone and something ancient, ethereal, and hollow. Nour took a trembling step closer, her hands outstretched as if to ward off a nightmare. I tried. Yusef, you know I tried. They wouldn't let me see you. You left me alone, he interrupted, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, which only made the accusation cut deeper. No, that's not true, she cried, desperation clawing at her throat. They took you away, you were sick, I had no choice. You had a choice, Yusef whispered, and the temperature in the room dropped even further. You chose your life. You walked away. The weight of his words, of her oldest and most painful memory, brought Nour to her knees. Sobs tore from her chest, raw and agonizing. What was I supposed to do? She wailed at the phantom of her brother. "I was just a kid. I was a child." Yusef stood from the bed and began to walk toward her. As he moved, his shadow stretched and warped behind him, growing taller, darker, transforming into a monstrous, looming figure that twisted on the stone wall. "You became strong," he said, his voice changing, growing deeper. "Smart, brave, you fight for truth, for justice." His eyes, once so familiar, suddenly turned into pools of absolute black. "But you could not save me." The shadow behind him split open, forming a grotesque, gaping maw of pure darkness. "Confess," Yusef commanded, his voice now a deep, cold, inhuman rumble that vibrated through the floor. "Confess your failure or join me in the dark." Nour looked up, her face streaked with tears, staring into the black voids that were once her brother's eyes. She saw the abyss waiting for her, the promise of eternal guilt. But in that moment, something inside her, the same fire that had propelled her through the door, ignited once more. "I couldn't save you," she whispered, her voice trembling but clear. "But I never stopped trying to find you. I never ever stopped loving you." The shadow lunged. It was a silent, rushing void, an embodiment of her guilt and regret coming to consume her. But Nour stood her ground. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She planted her feet, placed a hand over her heart, and cried out with all the strength in her soul, "I will always carry you. Always. But I will not die here." The shadow stopped dead, inches from her face. The monstrous form wavered. Yusef, the boy at the heart of the darkness, stared at her for a long, silent moment. The rage, the coldness, all of it seemed to melt away from his face. Then he smiled. It was a soft, sad smile, full of a love that transcended even this magical torment. "Then live," he said, his voice once again that of the little boy she remembered. With his last word, the stone door to the main hall slid open. The vision of Yusef and the monstrous shadow dissolved into nothingness. The room was just a cold, empty chamber once more. Shaking but alive, Nour walked out of the darkness and back into the torchlight of the hall. Karim rushed to her side immediately, his face etched with worry. Mona threw her arms around her, holding her tight. Even Hassan, still slumped against the wall, looked up at her, a flicker of quiet understanding in his haunted eyes. Nour allowed herself a moment to lean on her friends. Then she wiped her tears, pulled away, and stood tall again. The trial had broken her down, but it had not broken her. She looked at each of them, her gaze steady and strong. "Whatever happens next," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound conviction, "we face it together." As if in response to her words, the torches all around the hall roared to life, their flames climbing higher than ever before. 3 trials remained. The weight of judgment still hung heavy in the air, and somewhere deep in the darkness of the tomb, stirred by their defiance and their pain, something vast and ancient was beginning to wake. They didn't have time to rest. The walls began to tremble again, groaning like an ancient beast turning in its sleep. A crack split across the floor, stone shifting beneath their feet. Karim grabbed Mona's hand just before she stumbled. "We have to keep moving," he urged, his voice tight with panic. But Hassan didn't move. He stood staring at the ground as if listening to something only he could hear, a phantom tremor in the heart of the earth. "Hassan," Nour said gently, her hand on his shoulder. "Stay with us?" He finally looked up, and his eyes were different now. They were shadowed, hollowed out by a terror that went beyond the collapsing walls. "It won't stop," he said quietly, his voice a dead monotone. "It wants all of us. It won't let anyone leave unless—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The unspoken truth hung in the air, heavier than the stone pressing in on them. They all knew now. This wasn't just a tomb. It was a courtroom. This wasn't just death. This was judgment. A low metallic hum filled the chamber, vibrating through their bones. Another door materialized from the solid stone wall, shimmering into existence. This one was engraved with a symbol Mona recognized instantly. A scarab, the symbol of rebirth, of her life's work. "It's mine," she said softly, the words escaping her before she could stop them. Karim turned to her, his face a mask of disbelief and fear. "Mona, wait, maybe we can figure out another way. Maybe we don't have to walk into these rooms." "Yes, we do," she interrupted, her voice firm, cutting through his desperation. "Or we stay trapped here forever." Nour took her hand, a silent offering of support. "You don't have to do this alone." Mona tried to smile, but it was a brittle, fragile thing. "I don't think I have a choice." She stepped forward, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This time, when the door swung open, it revealed not just a room, but a memory. She was back inside the library at Cairo University. Stacks of books towered around her like tomb walls, casting long, dark shadows. Papers covered the massive oak desk maps of ancient necropolises, translated funerary rites, faded expedition notes. But this wasn't a normal memory. It was too sharp, too real, because she wasn't alone. Sitting across from her was someone she hadn't seen in 5 years. Her mentor, Dr. Yasser Halim. "Mona," he said gently, his voice the same warm, encouraging tone she remembered so well. "You were always my best student." She stared at him, a wave of horror washing over her. He had gone missing 5 years ago on an expedition, presumed dead, lost to the sands. He slid a papyrus scroll toward her across the polished wood. It was the same one they had translated together, the one that spoke of the priest of the gate. "You remember this," he said, not as a question, but a statement. Her voice shook. "This isn't real." "Of course it is." Dr. Halim smiled, a sad, knowing look in his eyes. "You came here because of me. You wanted to find my missing expedition." "No," Mona whispered, denial a weak shield against the creeping dread. "I came because you wanted to prove I didn't die for nothing." His words struck her like a physical blow. The unspoken ambition that had driven her for years laid bare. Mona closed her eyes, trying to shut out the illusion. "I trusted you, and you still do," he said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. The walls of the library flickered. The towering bookshelves dissolved into mist. The desk vanished into nothing. In a blink, they were standing back inside the suffocating underground tunnels of the monastery, and Dr. Halim changed. The man she knew was gone. Blood, thick and black, dripped from his eyes. His skin peeled back from his face, revealing not muscle and bone, but intricate carvings. Hieroglyphs. The ancient words of the dead writhed beneath his flesh like trapped insects. "You followed me," he rasped, his voice a dry, grating sound. Just like they did. Behind him, the shadows in the tunnel moved, coalescing into forms. Bodies appeared. Human, but broken, twisted into impossible shapes of agony. Her mentor's lost expedition. They were still here, still alive in some horrifying way, still suffering. "You were supposed to finish my work," Dr. Hallam hissed, the sound a serpent's threat. "You were supposed to open the way." He lunged, his movement impossibly fast. She dodged, barely slamming her shoulder hard into the stone wall. The pain was sharp, real. "Why are you doing this?" she cried, her voice cracking. He roared, a sound that shook the very chamber, a symphony of rage and despair. "I gave everything to unlock the ancient power of judgment, but I failed. So now the priest has bound me, and soon you will join us." His hand transformed, fingers elongating into claws of sharpened bone. He raised them to tear her throat out, and in that instant, Mona did something she'd never done before. She screamed back. Oh. It was a sound of pure defiance, a raw, primal rejection of this nightmare. Her hand found a broken stone shard on the floor. Without thinking, she grabbed it and slammed it into the monstrous figure's chest. The image shattered like glass. The creature that was Dr. Hallam froze. Then, for a fleeting moment, the man she once knew returned. He smiled, a genuine, sad smile. "You are stronger than I was." He reached out, his hand no longer a claw, and gently touched her face. "I'm sorry." Then he fell, and as he hit the ground, he shattered into a cloud of fine gray dust. The door behind her swung open. Mona walked out, but she was transformed. She wasn't trembling like Nour had been. She wasn't broken like Hassan. She was fire. A cold, hard resolve had settled in her soul. "We're ending this," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. Karim nodded, a new determination in his eyes. Nour wiped the tears from her face. Hassan stood a little straighter, the vacant look in his eyes replaced by a flicker of hope. Only two of them remained to face their trial. But something had changed. They could all feel it now. They were being watched, not just by the malevolent presence of the Jackal Priest, but by something else, something older, something that had been buried deep beneath the monastery for millennia, something that wanted to wake. And with every step they took, with every door they opened, it was getting closer. The tremors grew stronger, shaking the very foundations of the tomb. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the torches lining the walls flickered violently, casting dancing, distorted shadows. From the throne, the Jackal Priest rose. It was taller now, its skeletal form stretching and reshaping with an unnatural cracking sound. The gold in its elaborate headdress began to pulse with a malevolent inner light. Instinctively, Karim raised his camera again. This time it powered on, the screen flickering to life, its battery meter inexplicably showing a full charge. But what he saw through the lens made his blood run cold. He didn't see Mona, Nour, or Tarek. He saw only himself standing completely alone in the vast, echoing chamber. Mona's voice cut through the tense silence, sharp and urgent. Karim put it down. He lowered the camera slowly, his hands trembling. It's showing me something." Just then, behind the throne, the solid obsidian wall groaned and split apart. A massive crack widened, revealing a spiral staircase that descended into an endless, consuming blackness. The air suddenly grew heavy, pressing down on their chests with an immense, suffocating weight. Tarek turned to face them, his expression grim. "This is it," he announced, his voice low but clear. "The final gate." Nour frowned, her brow furrowed with confusion. "You said we were being judged. Does that mean it's over?" A strange look crossed Tarek's face, a mixture of deep sorrow and profound dread. "No," he said softly. It means judgment has chosen. Before anyone could even process his words, the Jackal Priest raised a long, clawed hand and pointed it directly at Karim. In an instant, the flames of the torches turned a ghastly, ethereal blue, and the air froze, biting at their exposed skin. Karim's camera was violently jerked from his grasp. It floated in the air right in front of him, its lens aimed squarely at his face like the barrel of a gun. "Karim," Nour whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't look," but it was too late. He was already captivated, his eyes locked on the screen. It began to flash with images, moments from his past playing out like a fever dream. He saw his university film projects, scenes of him laughing with friends, the premiere of his first short film. The awards, the accolades, the rising fame, it was all there. And then the image shifted. The night of the car crash. He saw his best friend, Omar, in the passenger seat. Drunk, yes, but pleading with him, begging him to slow down. He saw the blur of the road, the screech of tires skidding on wet asphalt. He heard the sickening crunch of metal and the explosive sound of shattering glass. And then he saw himself, climbing out of the wreckage, dazed but alive. Walking away, alone, a voice, ancient and resonant, filled the hall. It wasn't angry, but its depth was terrifying, almost tender. "You built your life upon the silence of another." Karim shook his head violently, stumbling backward. No, it was an accident. I didn't mean to." "But you never spoke the truth," the voice interrupted, its tone unwavering. Karim collapsed to his knees, the strength gone from his legs. The camera still hovered above him, a silent accuser, displaying the phantom blood on his hands and the real tears now streaming down his face. "Tell them," the voice commanded, its power absolute. "Speak your sin, and your soul may yet walk in light." A raw, guttural scream tore from Karim's throat, his voice cracking with years of buried guilt. "I left him to die." The echo of his confession ricocheted off the stone walls, filling every corner of the vast chamber, searing itself into the silence that followed. And then it was over. The camera dropped from the air, hitting the stone floor with a final definitive crack and breaking into pieces. The Jackal Priest slowly lowered its hand, and the brilliant gold in its eyes seemed to dim, satisfied. Karim was on the floor, gasping for breath, shaking uncontrollably, but he was alive. He looked up at Mona, his face a mask of shame and relief, tears streaking through the dust on his cheeks. "It knows," he choked out. "It knows everything." Tarek nodded grimly, his expression unchanging. It always did. As the last echoes of the Jackal Priest's reign faded, silence descended upon the throne room. But a new sound, a faint whisper, drew their attention. Behind the stone throne, a hidden staircase pulsed with a vibrant, malevolent light. Each step descending into the darkness glowed with blood-red hieroglyphs, symbols of curses and forgotten rituals. The air grew heavy, thick with anticipation. Tarek turned, his face grim and unyielding, to face them. His friends, his companions, who had just witnessed his death and return. He looked at each of them, Karim clutching the remnants of his camera, Nour with her fierce defiance, and Mona with her wavering faith. His voice, when he spoke, was steady, yet carried the weight of a terrible final confession. "One last truth remains," he declared, his words echoing in the vast hall. "The priest's reign ends with me." Nour's brow furrowed in confusion. The logic didn't hold. They had all seen it. The scales, the heart, the verdict. But you passed the judgment. We saw you." Her voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Tarek offered a faint, sad smile. "Died?" He interrupted softly, the word hanging in the air between them. "Yes, I did, but not completely." He took a single step forward, away from the throne and toward the center of the room. As he moved, something unnatural happened. His shadow, cast by the pulsing red light of the staircase, detached from his feet. It stretched and warped, growing impossibly long, slithering up the ancient stone walls like a serpent made of pure black smoke. It twisted and coiled, a living darkness that seemed to have a will of its own. Mona gasped, her eyes widening in horror as she stared at the monstrous shadow. "Tarek, what are you?" she whispered, a new kind of fear creeping into her voice. It wasn't the fear of a monster, but the fear of losing a friend to something far worse. He turned his gaze to Mona, and in his eyes she saw a profound, bottomless sadness. The hardened explorer was gone, replaced by a man bearing an unbearable burden. "When I first came here, it wasn't for treasure or fame," he began, his voice low and heavy with regret. "I was searching for Sarah, my sister. I found her here. She wasn't lost in the desert, as the stories said. She was taken, bound by the priest, a prisoner in this unholy place. I saw what it was doing to her soul, and I begged it. I pleaded with it to let her go." He paused, the memory twisting his features in pain. "It agreed, but its mercy came with a condition." He slowly raised a hand, placing it flat over his heart, the very spot where the creature's claw had pierced him. "I became its vessel," he said, the words tasting like poison. The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The others instinctively took a step back, a chasm of understanding and terror opening between them and the man they thought they knew. Nour's mind raced, connecting the impossible dots. The creature's strange focus on Tarek, his impossible survival, the way the monastery itself seemed to obey him. "You're saying—" She started, her voice barely a whisper, afraid to give voice to the monstrous truth. Tarek's expression was one of grim acceptance. He nodded slowly. "Yes," he confirmed, his voice devoid of all emotion. "The Jackal Priest and I, we are one." As if on cue, the grotesque, canine-headed creature standing by the scales moved. It had been unnervingly still, a statue of judgment. But now it tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion that perfectly, chillingly mirrored Tarek's own nod. The connection was undeniable, a puppet master and his shadow made flesh. The horrific synergy sent a fresh wave of terror through the group. They weren't just in the priest's lair. They had been walking beside it the entire time. Karim stumbled backward, his hand flying to his mouth as the full, horrifying scope of their journey crashed down upon him. His quest for a story, for the ultimate footage, had led him into a trap orchestrated by his own guide. "Then all of this," he stammered, gesturing wildly at the chamber, the scales, the bodies of those who had failed, the trials, the deaths, everything. "It was you?" A flicker of pain crossed Tarek's face, a brief glimpse of the man trapped inside the monster. "No," he said, his voice sharp with denial. "It was the price I paid to keep you alive. It wanted you all from the moment you stepped inside. I guided you, manipulated the trials, took the fall, all to give you a chance to escape." The ground beneath them began to tremble violently. A deep, guttural groan emanated from the very foundations of the monastery. cracks spider-webbed across the stone floor, splitting open to reveal a fiery chasm below. From this abyss, a cacophony of screams erupted, the tormented voices of the damned, the souls judged and consumed by the priest for centuries, echoing up from their eternal prison, the air filled with their agony. And then the Jackal Priest moved. It stepped away from the scales, its form wavering like a heat mirage. Its monstrous face began to shift and dissolve, the bone-white mask melting away to reveal the face beneath. It was Tarek's own face, twisted in a silent scream. "Your debt is paid," it said, but the voice that came from its throat was Tarek's own, a perfect, horrifying echo. Tarek turned to his friends, his real eyes filled with an urgent desperation. "Run," he commanded. "Please, get to the surface. And whatever you do, don't look back." Mona lunged forward, refusing to accept the sacrifice. She grabbed his arm, her grip desperate. "No, we can end this together, Tarek. There has to be another way." He looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, a genuine, heartbreaking smile touched his lips. It was the smile of the friend she remembered, the leader who had protected them. A single tear traced a path through the dust on his cheek. "This is the only way," he said softly, his voice full of a tragic finality. With a gentle strength, he pulled his arm free from her grasp. He turned his back on them, on the world of the living, and faced the priest, his own monstrous reflection. He took a deep breath, a man facing his own executioner, his own sin. And then he whispered 2 words, not to the creature, but to the darkness he had harbored within himself. "I release you." The chamber exploded. An atomic blast of pure, white light erupted from the point where Tarek and the priest met. It wasn't a light of salvation, but one of raw, annihilating power. The ancient walls of the monastery, which had stood for millennia, screamed and cracked under the strain. The giant statues of Anubis shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The scales of judgment, the very symbol of the priest's power, toppled from their dais and crashed to the floor, broken and useless. And through the blinding light and deafening roar, the unearthly scream of the jackal echoed through the monastery one last time, a shriek of rage and dissolution, before it was finally, blessedly consumed by silence. When the light faded, the world had changed. The suffocating darkness of the underground chamber was gone, replaced by the cool, pre-dawn air of the desert. Karim, Nour, and Mona were standing on the sandy surface, blinking against the coming dawn. The ground was stable beneath their feet. They were alive. They were free. They turned, expecting to see the entrance to the cursed monastery, the crumbling facade that had lured them in. But there was nothing, only endless stretches of desert, rolling dunes sculpted by the wind. The entire structure, the tomb, the throne room, all of it had vanished as if it had never been. It was gone, only desert, only wind. Karim clutched the broken, dirt-caked camera to his chest like a holy relic, the only proof of their ordeal. Nour, ever the stoic, simply stared at the horizon, her expression unreadable. And Mona, her face streaked with tears, whispered a quiet prayer into the wind. A prayer for Tarek, for his sacrifice, for his soul. As if in response, the sun began to rise over the distant hills of Minya, painting the sky in a deep, haunting shade of blood red. But in the deserts of Egypt, the dead do not truly sleep. They wait, they watch, and sometimes when the conditions are just right, they whisper. The story of the haunted monastery became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered by the villagers in El Minya. They say that even now, with the structure gone, their presence lingers in the ruins that are no longer there. They say that when the wind blows across the dunes just right, you can still hear the faint echoes of chanting rising from the sand, a deep, resonant voice carried on the breeze. It calls out the names of those who trespassed on its sacred ground, a ghostly roll call of the damned. And one name, they say, always comes last, a final, mournful whisper that chills the soul of any who hear it. Tarek, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that story. If you did, please subscribe DarkWhisper AI. Leave a comment. The next episode will be up soon. Don't miss. Goodbye.